On July 14th, a new phase in the war in Ukraine began. Not on the battlefield, but with a deadline. President Donald Trump gave Moscow exactly 50 days to agree to a ceasefire. If not, Russia would face a wave of 100% tariffs and unprecedented secondary sanctions targeting countries like China, India, and Brazil, its most important trading partners. At the same time, the U.S. resumed the supply of advanced weapons to Ukraine, including Patriot missiles. That was not the initial posture of President Trump. So what changed? The shift in Trump's posture toward Russia did not happen overnight. Throughout early 2025, the American president pursued a strategy of restrained engagement with Moscow. Despite growing criticism from both domestic and European voices, Trump maintained regular communication with Vladimir Putin, insisting that direct dialogue could prevent further escalation in Ukraine. But as Russian offensives intensified in the spring, especially in the Donbass and around Kharkiv, Trump's patience began to wear thin. Intelligence reports indicated that Moscow had not only ignored ceasefire proposals, but had also increased its use of long-range missiles and Iranian-supplied drones against civilian targets. By late May, satellite imagery revealed the mobilization of additional Russian forces near the southern front, contradicting claims that Russia was open to negotiation. Inside the White House, key advisors, including military and trade officials, began pushing for a firmer response. Simultaneously, pressure mounted from European allies alarmed by the scale of destruction and Washington's apparent inaction. A particularly tense phone call between Trump and Putin in early July reportedly ended with Trump cutting the line, signaling a rupture in their communication. It was against this backdrop of mounting battlefield losses, diplomatic failure, and growing allied frustration that Trump announced his 50-day ultimatum. And as the political pressure intensified, the Kremlin began preparing for confrontation. The Kremlin dismissed the 50-day deadline as an act of coercion and accused Washington of attempting to dictate the outcome of the war. In a televised address, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated that Russia will never negotiate under threats, signaling that the Kremlin viewed the ultimatum not as a diplomatic overture, but as a provocation. On the ground, Russia accelerated its operations. Ukrainian officials reported a sharp increase in missile and drone attacks targeting civilian areas and infrastructure. Overnight strikes became routine, with energy grids, railway hubs, and residential districts hit in major cities such as Kiev, Odessa, and Lviv. Intelligence services from the UK and Poland confirmed that Russia was also redeploying troops along key axes of the front, including Zaporizhzhia and eastern Donetsk, possibly preparing for a broad offensive. In parallel, Russia began reinforcing its economic ties with non-Western partners. Delegations traveled to Beijing and New Delhi within days of the ultimatum, signaling efforts to solidify oil and gas agreements in anticipation of upcoming sanctions. Brazil, while officially neutral, has also come under increased scrutiny for its continued imports of Russian fuel. Within NATO, reactions were mixed but largely supportive. European officials praised Trump's new firmness, while also warning of the dangers of unchecked escalation. For Ukraine, however, the message was clear. The window for negotiation was narrowing, and Russia intended to use every day of it to reshape the battlefield. Despite its strategic intent, the 50-day ultimatum carries serious risks, many of them outside the battlefield. One of the most pressing concerns is regional spillover. As U.S. weapons re-enter the conflict zone and rhetoric hardens on both sides, the risk of miscalculation increases. Russian officials have already warned that Western supply lines, many of which run through NATO territory, could become targets if the conflict escalates further. A single strike near the Polish or Romanian border could draw the alliance into a wider confrontation. There's also the question of international cohesion. While NATO and the EU have backed the strategy, key global players like India, Brazil, and South Africa may view secondary sanctions as overreach. If these countries begin to push back economically or diplomatically, it could fracture the broader coalition needed to pressure Moscow. Politically, President Zelensky's government may face renewed pressure if the offensive continues to devastate infrastructure without altering the strategic map. And even more dangerous, there's the risk of setting a precedent. If Russia resists the ultimatum without significant consequence, future threats from the West could lose credibility, weakening diplomatic leverage not just in Ukraine, but in other global crises. With each passing day, the space for error continues to shrink. The 50-day ultimatum marks a pivotal moment in a war that has already reshaped Europe's security landscape. For the United States and its allies, it represents a calculated attempt to reassert diplomatic pressure through a blend of military support and economic coercion. For Russia, it appears to be a final window, either to escalate or to negotiate from a position of strength. What emerges at the end of this period, whether a ceasefire, a broader war, or continued stalemate, will depend not just on weapons or sanctions, but on choices made under intense pressure. Let me know in the comments what you think is going to happen. If you found this analysis useful and want to stay informed on global military and geopolitical developments, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue delivering fact-based content on the world's most critical conflicts.